Hello readers, I'm the Avid Reader and today we're reviewing The Age of Walls, How Barriers Between Nations Are Changing Around the World, written by Tim Marshall in 2018. So this is another book on geopolitics by Tim Marshall, and this one talks about the internal divisions within nations or continents. So it talks about wars, but it also talks a lot about divisions. So the first chapter is on China, and he mentions that the Han Chinese have been populating non-Han Chinese areas of China to have it become majority Han. So Xinjiang has become majority Han, although they are Muslim originally. Also, since China has opened their markets up, you have the eastern coast, which is much wealthier than the rural west. And China now has a two-tier system kind of between the urbanites and the ruralites. So if you're from an urban area, you're getting better education and you're gonna get a better job and be more rich. While if you are in a rural area, you're gonna have less money, harder to get a good job, it's gonna be back-breaking work, and all the social services are worse. This is kind of a caste system, as if you're from a rural area, you're not really allowed to move to an urban area and get the same benefits as an urbanite. So you have clear inequality there between the urbanites and the ruralites in China. And also, China set up its own firewall in the internet, and although you have VPNs, they're not effective really. So China will turn a blind eye to benign content maybe, but if you're doing some things that are trying to organize protests, even if you have a VPN, the Chinese security system is gonna notice you. The second chapter is about the United States, and it talks about the inflow of Hispanics. So now you have something like 10 million people in the United States who are legal immigrants. You have more and more Hispanics, so they make up more than a third of the population in the Southwest now. They are introducing Spanish in more and more states. And he also talks about that there are racial tensions, especially between the blacks and whites. There's also more political polarization now between Republicans and Democrats. So now in one camp you have the politically correct, and then in the other you have the strong nationalists who don't want any immigrants in. The third chapter talks about Israel and Palestine, and the interesting thing about Israel, it's a liberal democracy, but it's politically and ethnically quite diverse actually. So Jews make up about 75% of Israel proper, and then you have another 15-20% of people who are Muslim. Within Jews, you have many different levels. So you have Reform Jews, you have Orthodox Jews, you have ultra-Orthodox Jews, and they come into conflict and they don't really associate with each other. They don't intermarry. So when there's a government, there's a big coalition between these different interest groups. And of course, if you're an Arab, you're much wealthier in Israel proper than in Palestine. And you have security walls protecting Israel from Gaza and the West Bank to lower terrorism. And it should be pointed out that people like to talk about how Israel badly treats Palestine, but in fact Palestinians in other Arabic countries such as Lebanon or Jordan, they're treated pretty much as second-class citizens. In some countries they cannot become citizens, in others they can't own property, so they are discriminated against. The fourth chapter talks about the Middle East. So the big conflict in the Middle East is the Sunni-Shia divide. And this is balanced out between the power play of Sunni Saudi Arabia and Shia Iran. These different Arabic countries, what you often have is a majority Sunni population, but then a large minority of Shia. And the Shias are a slim majority in a few countries. There's also a lot of tensions between ethnic groups. The Kurds are really resentful of what the state has done to them, but probably because of power politics of Turkey and Iran, they were never united to a single Kurdistan. And because secularism has been associated with dictatorship, now people turn towards Islam instead. And there isn't really an intellectual class in the Middle East. There aren't that many books that are translated into Arabic. There is a lack of separation between Islam and politics, and that leads to disaster in a state, and you have conflict constantly. And right now, half of the region is in conflict. The fifth chapter talks about the Indian subcontinent. In Bangladesh, you regularly have floods, and you have a lot of Bangladeshi refugees who come to the eastern provinces of India, but the Indians don't want them. So around the world, you have these walls being set up to keep out the migrants. It's not only in the United States. This is also the case in India and also the case in South Africa, for example. And the relation between Pakistan and India is always cool. Regularly, you have some small fire exchange between the two sides, but it doesn't escalate, thank God, because both have nukes. It should be kept in mind that India still has its caste system in place in effect because culturally it's still effective. So part of Hinduism explicitly states the caste system, so you don't really have much social mobility. Affirmative action hasn't really helped. The lower castes are really badly treated, especially the untouchables. And India, as it's Hindu, is afraid of getting too many Muslim migrants, which it could risk from Bangladesh. The sixth chapter is about Africa. The thing is, when the Europeans divided it in the 1800s, they did not care about ethnic groups at all. So now you have a bunch of ethnic groups that are across states. For example, you have the Bantu who are a majority in the Congo but wanna unite with the minorities in countries close by. And this is one of the causes of conflict. You have separatism constantly in different countries in Africa. Countries in Africa have tried to build a national identity. They failed. People mostly identify with their tribes. Something new that's occurring in Africa is that you have these gated communities that are being formed. So the people who are relatively wealthy in Africa, they go live in these gated communities and they have security services that protect them. So now you really have the big difference between the working poor in Africa and then the minority who are hidden behind these gated communities because they're afraid of crime. It's the second highest crime continent after Latin America. The seventh chapter is on Europe. So Tim Marshall spends a lot of time talking about the differences between Western Germans and Eastern Germans. Eastern Germans, for example, are poorer and they're also much more resentful against migration. And the migrant crisis has led to a rise in anti-migration parties. They don't want Muslims coming in because they believe it will dilute their liberal culture. And the thing is, these Muslims, they concentrate in cities. So although there may be 5% of the population in countries, they may be a fifth of the population in the cities, so they're quite noticeable. And the problem, of course, is that a lot of these Muslims, they don't want to integrate. They are radicalized by their preachers who tell them do not assimilate into Europe. So of course you have a rise of more hardline right-wing parties. This you can combine with the Euroscepticism that has arisen because of the euro. So after the euro, you had some economic crises in different countries such as Greece. So now you have the rise of Eurosceptic parties in many countries. And Tim Marshall believes that the European Union could actually collapse into different trade blocs. So you could, for example, have the Nordic countries form into one bloc. You could have Poland, Czechia, Slovakia and Hungary form into the Visegrad group. The eighth chapter is about the UK, which left the EU. Here Marshall talks about the split between the anywheres, which are cosmopolitans, and the everywheres. And the cosmopolitans, they're of course pro-European Union and they like having migrants coming in. They don't have to bear the consequences, of course. The somewheres, or the working class, are resentful towards this. So that's why they supported Brexit, because they believed that their interests were no longer being looked after with the European Union. And Marshall emphasizes here that a lot of people who are anti-immigration or pro-Brexit, they're not racist or bigoted. But if you keep calling them bigoted all the time, then you might actually get them to join people who actually are racist and bigoted. And Marshall discusses the different national identities in the United Kingdom, the Welsh, the Irish, the Scottish, but he says that most people in these regions still believe in the United Kingdom identity, and most people in the United Kingdom now, they're really religious, although they identify as Christians. The exception to this is in Northern Ireland, where the Catholics are quite religious, which make up about half of the population there. And of course you have tensions constantly between the Catholics and the Protestants in Northern Ireland, and although they make about 40% each of the population, they live in segregated areas where 90% of one group dominates. So how would I rate The Age of Wars by Tim Marshall? I'm gonna give it a 7 out of 10. This is Tim Marshall's least good book. Why? Because he talks about inequality a lot, and he doesn't really understand the causes of it, or that some groups just work harder or are more successful. And that's my main criticism with this book. But overall, it's a decent book, a 7 out of 10. And you learn a lot about different countries and regions and the internal divisions there. He's mostly correct on them. It's just that he really misunderstands how inequality works. Inequality is a symptom, it's not a cause of your problems. And sometimes inequality is justified if you understand economics. So this was the Average Reader's review of The Age of Wars, written by Tim Marshall in 2018. It got a 7 out of 10. There are a bunch of other global politics books you can watch on this channel, including some Tim Marshall ones. I hope you readers enjoyed this book review, and I will see you readers next time.